Submit! No! Not like this. Mercy!
This is a video about immersion. How it's created, how it's broken, and how one strange game design decision has been puzzling me for over 14 years.
I can't believe it.
There is a magical thing that video games can do, which is to convince you, at least for a time, that you own a real place where what you do really matters. Your rational mind might know that this is just a game, software that you purchased, rendering pixels to a two-dimensional screen. The world that you're existing in has no soil beneath its ground or land beyond its oceans. Its walls are micron thin, with nothing but a digital void beyond them. The characters you're talking to are nothing but lists of animations and voice lines hooked into functions that play them on cue. You may have even played the game several times before, to the point where you know exactly how the world will react to everything that you do. And yet, in spite of all these apparent hurdles, sometimes all this knowledge simply falls away, and the flawed, incomplete simulation in front of you becomes as real to you as anything can be. This experience goes by many names, but we most commonly call it immersion, and no matter what you call it, I am fascinated by it. It's an experience that players actively seek out, and one that game designers agonise over trying to create. And yet producing it appears, to an extent at least, to be a subjective and personal process. If you talk to a set of people who all found a specific game immersive, and then ask them why, you'll likely get a bunch of different reasons, and you'll also get a lot of uncertainty too. Speaking for myself, when I think about the games I find the most immersive, the ones in which I feel most fully a part of the world, I often struggle to work out exactly why. Although I find the process of immersion production interesting, I am just as interested in how immersion is broken. Sometimes all it takes is one piece of bad dialogue, or one unfortunate glitch, and it's gone. The spell is broken. The magic that might have taken hours of your time and the work of dozens of developers to produce is shattered, sometimes permanently. In this video, I want to talk about a specific immersion shattering mechanic and what it can teach us. A mechanic that is a small part of what might be the most discussed piece of art of the past 2 decades. A game still often cited as the most immersive of all time. Today, we're travelling to Skyrim, land of long walks, shouting dragons, tired memes, and hundreds of types of snow. Now, to be upfront about it, Skyrim is not a favourite game of mine. I'm a card-carrying and certified Morrow boomer. But I really don't want this to come across like a popular thing bad, actually, video. Firstly, because that's just not the kind of video I want to make, and trust me, that's not the direction this one is going. But also because I don't think Skyrim bad at all. Skyrim, in fact, very good. It has many characteristics I adore, and it absolutely has the power to cast the spell of immersion on me. Wandering around its stark and beautiful world, humming along to its incredible music, following my feet to whatever landmark seems the most appealing, under its stunning skyboxes, it's absolutely capable of placing me in its world. When replaying it to get footage for this video, I often found myself getting sucked back in and playing more than was strictly necessary. But, every once in a while, something strange happens which completely snaps me out of the experience. No, it's not being sent into orbit by a giant, or seeing a dragon fly through a mountain. In fact, these kind of quirks of the physics engine tend not to bother me. Decades of loving janky games has given me a pretty high resilience towards this kind of thing. I'm currently playing Stalker 2, and it may well end up being my game of the year, and not a minute goes by in that game without some glitchy nonsense happening. No, I'm talking about something much less obviously glitchy, but to me an awful lot stranger. Every now and again, when you're fighting someone, and you're about to deliver the final blow, they will fall to their knees and yell,
Please don't kill me!
So why does this apparently innocuous event ruin my immersion so badly? And how does it do so much worse than all the more silly and broken things that this game can do? And does any of this matter at all? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Now you might have looked at the runtime of this video and be thinking, Bard, are you seriously going to spend over half an hour rambling about a minor mechanic in a 14-year-old game? Well, yes, but there is a twist. Not a great twist, arguably a fairly obvious twist, but still, trust me, this will be fun. To better understand my oddly specific grievance, it's important to spend a bit of time on how and why Skyrim works so well for the people who love it. How is it still topping greatest games lists so long after its release? Why are tens of thousands of people still playing it daily? Well, let's pretend for a moment that it has nothing at all to do with the immense number of pornographic mods for the game, and instead focus on the vanilla Skyrim experience. Every aspect of games can play a role in how immersive they are. From the writing to the music, from the graphical fidelity to the user interface, and so on. Role-playing games like Skyrim have further ways to immerse you in their worlds that are more genre-specific, through things like memorable companion characters, or through the interesting and expressive choices you can make as a player, or the richness and uniqueness of its world-building. It's arguable how much Skyrim succeeds in any of these more RPG-specific areas, but what is less arguable is that this is not at all where Skyrim's focus is. Meaningful choices are few and far between, NPC dialogue is pretty sparse and functional compared to most of Skyrim's more verbose peers. Companion characters to form relationships with, a staple of the genre, are all but absent outside of a notable exception in a DLC. And this is not by accident. Skyrim doesn't attempt the usual RPG trappings and fail at them. It is simply aiming at something else. Instead, Skyrim's focus is on making its specific brand of open-ended exploration as consistently entertaining and absorbing as possible. Its world is gorgeous and dense with activity. No matter what direction you'll walk in, you'll quickly find something to do, somewhere to explore or something to fight. Skyrim is also good at pushing you into engaging with its world in the right way. Other more traditional dialogue-heavy RPGs might give you hours of questing to do within a single city neighbourhood. But Skyrim is always itching to give you an excuse to set off wandering. Quest givers will invariably come up with an excuse to send you to some distant cave or dungeon. And the game is justifiably expecting you to get distracted with a whole lot of fun shenanigans on the way. In fact, it has the Radiant quest system purpose-built for exactly this. Procedurally generated quests that are almost devoid of content, just a request to kill some no-name or collect a MacGuffin, but which are perfectly good at giving you an excuse to chart another course in its world, an excuse to see new vistas unfold before you, while listening to the pleasant crunch of snow underfoot, and of course Jeremy Soul's incredible score. I'd argue a key part of Skyrim's successful gameplay formula is consistency. If we were to chart the level of, let's call it drama, because I can't think of a better word right now, of a more structurally conventional RPG like, say, Baldur's Gate 3, it might look something like this. Lulls of low drama hours spent organising our inventories or backtracking through the world to collect missed quests. Lots of middling time spent on more routine conversations, exploration, and so on. And lots of large spikes, representing memorable combat moments, plot twists, sex scenes with tentacle monsters, and so on. Whereas Skyrim aims to look more like this. Minimal downtime and faff, and a pretty sparse number of notable gameplay moments or narrative beats. Instead, it aims to produce an endless number of good vibes for as long as you want them, immersed by a consistent aesthetic and a feeling of being a solitary but powerful wanderer in a beautiful world full of possibility. The other thing besides wandering around and following your feet that you'll spend loads of time doing in Skyrim is fighting. No wimpy speech checks or creative peaceful problem solving here. There are almost no problems in the world of Skyrim that can't be solved by slaughtering whole dungeons full of unfortunates. Lost your keys? Stuck in a failing marriage? Feeling jaded because of all the unwarranted violence you're visiting upon the world? All problems that can probably be solved by killing a cave full of something or other in the land of Skyrim. And just like the rest of Skyrim's world, I would argue you're never meant or encouraged to think too deeply about the violence you commit. On the mechanical front, whether you're a swordy person, a magicy person, or the near inevitable stealth archer, every build is relatively easy and repetitive to execute. They all basically come down to looking at enemies and pressing left click. Or whatever the left click equivalent is for you console players. Maybe with some backpedaling if you're fighting something scary, or abusing the enemy pathfinding if you're fighting something really scary. There's just not that much space between the skill floor and skill ceiling, which is again pretty good for keeping the vibe consistent. We're not aiming for either mass slaughter power fantasy or Souls-like boss grinding here. You're also not really meant to think too hard about who or what you're killing and why. Sure, you might have some kind of pretext, most likely that they were foolish enough to stand between you and the MacGuffin du jour, but going much beyond that is not what Skyrim is looking for from you. A big example of this that came up in my background reading is the Draugr, which I'm probably mispronouncing. Skyrim's zombies. You'll be fighting these fellas endlessly, no matter where you go, and in a different game you might expect it to be a major plot point if the whole world were overrun with the undead, but not for Skyrim. As far as I can tell, we don't even know why they're refusing to stay dead, let alone getting insight into deeper lore questions, like why on earth their tombs are full of cartoonish traps that Wile E. Coyote would think are excessive. And it's not just the practical questions you're meant to ignore, but the emotional ones too. Should we be desecrating all these burial sites? Isn't it sad that all these folks can't find peace? Do they retain any element of who they once were, or are they just mindless husks? The correct answer to all of these questions is, don't think about it. These are just enemies to kill. Pinatas of loot and XP. A pleasant combat obstacle serving an aesthetic purpose, but not a narrative or emotional one. The same goes for Skyrim's ample supply of bandits. Now, they might look and sound more like living people, but they are barely more human in practice than the Draugr. They are all pleasantly anonymous, angry folk with no more than a half dozen voice actors between them. Sometimes you might find a note or something that references some bandity activity they were getting up to. But most of the time, Skyrim doesn't even bother to portray them as evil, threatening, or even human. These are just video game baddies who are fun to hit with swords. You aren't meant to dwell on the righteousness of your actions, or on all the orphans you're presumably leaving in your wake. Just move right on to the next bunch. After rifling through their pockets, of course. But here is where we get to it. The bizarre decision by Skyrim's developers that has been needling me for over a decade. Every now and again, when you're fighting bandits or other humans, when you've got them on the ropes and you're just about to hack, shoot or burn the last of their health points off, this happens.
Mercy!
I still vividly remember the first time this happened to me. My initial feelings were actually super positive. A mixture of curiosity, intrigue and excitement for what it might mean. I mean, it's a cool moment, right? A completely unexpected spike in our drama curve. In an enemy that you might have already written off as a fairly mindless murder machine with the emotional depth of a puddle. Perhaps, I foolishly thought, this is going to lead to an interesting encounter, or maybe a whole series of them, maybe a whole new quest line. But how to proceed? The game never taught me an accept surrender button. In the previous game in the series, Oblivion, I remembered you could surrender to guards you might have accidentally on purpose smacked with a sword, by holding block and pressing the talk to button. So I tried that. No dice. They just kept on crawling around on the floor. I tried putting my weapon away, and had just started looking around the room for some other option, when they said something unjustifiably confident like, "I've still got this!" and then started ineffectually flailing at me again, like nothing had happened. Leaving me, I don't mind telling you, fairly perplexed. I couldn't work out what I'd done wrong or what I'd missed, but it was clearly something. I thought maybe I'd completely missed out on a cool opportunity. But, sometime later, it happened again, and once again I could not work out what to do, and it all ended in confusing violence. Others of you in this situation may have quickly chalked this up to a glitch, or else some classic Bethesda jank, but I just did not. Nothing about these encounters felt unintentional or glitchy. To me it looked like a system that was working perfectly well, I was just being a bit thick and missing something obvious. Which, believe you me, would not be the first time. I was over 30 hours into Dark Souls before I realised you could sprint. But at some point, maybe through enough exposure, or talking with my gaming buddies, I don't quite recall, I realised that I wasn't missing anything at all. This is all that this system does. When reduced to low health, there's a chance for bandits and other humans to go into this surrender state, sometimes yelling a verbal surrender first. But invariably, after a few seconds, they'll get back up and start attacking you again. There is no peaceful option. Either you cut them down straight away, or they will get back up and make you do it a bit of time later. Now, the better adjusted of you might still be thinking, so what? You might have played Skyrim yourself and decided not to give a damn about this years ago. I mean, it's Skyrim, right? It'd be weird if you hadn't played it. If you're me, however, and thank goodness you're not, one of me is plenty, but if you were me, you'd still be thinking about this odd little system, years later, with only the vain hope that making a rambly video about it might free you from your mental purgatory. Let's dig into why. There are so many layers to the strangeness of this system for me. Firstly, and most obviously, it humanises your enemies in a very specific way. They can feel pain, but more importantly, they can feel fear. They fear dying. The inconsistency of it happening also makes it feel more organic and human. If it happened every time, it would be too rote, and it would reinforce the feeling that your enemies are mindless automata. But making it somewhat rare and unpredictable does the opposite to me. It makes it feel like a specific action this person is taking. They stand out from the crowd, from the normal noise of play. Now, in a different context, this kind of NPC humanisation could be good. Great, even. My last video was about Neo Scavenger, and we talked a fair bit in that video about how that game does a brilliant job of humanising your opponents, including by making them flee from you in fear. But there it perfectly serves that game's goals of making you and its world feel brutal and cruel. And Skyrim simply isn't going for that feeling. Again, Skyrim is aiming for a consistent vibe, and it's certainly not one of unbridled cruelty. You're not meant to be wincing at the violence you're meting out, you're meant to be enjoying it in an uncomplicated power fantasy sort of way. And look, you might disagree with me that humanising enemies in this way is disruptive to Skyrim's vibe. Maybe you see more darkness in Skyrim's heart than I do. But if you did, surely any pathos is completely undermined by the fact that they always try and murder you anyway. If we were trying to interpret what was happening literally, we'd have to assume that every single combatant in the game, not just the bandits, but the soldiers and everyone else too, is a backstabbing and honourless prick, perfectly willing to fake a surrender before trying to shiv you in the back. You might wonder if they were even sincere at all about being scared in the first place, and if this whole thing was not just a ruse. Trying to read this system literally honestly feels like a lost cause, but if we were trying to take it seriously, then it's even sillier, or at least just baffling. Why humanise the enemies if you are going to make it clear that they are honourless and easy to dismiss moments later? Why make the player feel sympathy for the folks you're fighting if you're going to immediately establish them as undeserving of that sympathy? What on earth is this trying to do? The behaviour is also incredibly predictable and contrived once it's been triggered. Every enemy, no matter their training or background, always takes a state-mandated 8-second breather before resuming the stabbing. So after repeated exposure, it just felt odder and odder to me. The only sensible course of action gameplay-wise is just to immediately kill them. You have the metagame knowledge to know that the fight isn't over, even though it looks like it is, so may as well just put them down straight away. But this too never stopped feeling weird to me. Again, Skyrim is not a game that supports much traditional choice-based role-playing, but you can still express yourself to an extent in how you engage with the world. We know from other sources, like the Mass Effect development team, that most players choose to play as good and virtuous characters over villainous ones when given the choice. So I got to imagine that most folks are trying to roleplay Skyrim as a do-gooder hero type where possible. And yet, with this specific mechanic, the game is forcing, or at least strongly encouraging you, to violently murder defenseless people who are, at least apparently, begging for their lives, over and over again. That's fine if you want to play as a violent or evil monster of a character, but for everyone else this is super hard to justify in universe. But even if this humanisation of enemies wasn't completely incoherent, humanising them at all feels like a design mistake, to the point where it completely gets in the way of me being able to enjoy Skyrim at all. Skyrim is a game which is at its best when you're freely exploring, or at least taking plenty of detours en route somewhere, rolling up on whatever animal den or bandit camp happens to get in your way. Now this is fine. Great, in fact, when we're staying in the vibes that Skyrim is most comfortable in. This is a digital playground, and these are some fun toys to play with. Why not see what those bandits are guarding in that fort? And while you're up there, why not see if you can shout so loudly that you send them pinwheeling down the mountain? But as soon as a confused bit of my brain was thinking of them as people, I think, wait, why am I killing you again? Because I could? Because I know there will be loot? Sure, some of you attacked me first, but I just wordlessly emerged out of the woods and started barbecuing your friends. You were just chilling here, not harming anyone. If you ever caught bandits in the act of banditing, I might feel differently, but they're almost all just standing around in their hideouts, not bothering anyone. Until the Dragonborn comes along to give them an instructive lesson in horrible violence, that is. Watch anyone's Skyrim playthrough while thinking of bandits as being people. People with interiority, their own hopes, dreams and fears, and it becomes painfully clear. We're the villains. And not just villains, but unstoppable monsters, killing endlessly with no motive beyond profit and curiosity. Now you might well be thinking, Bard, come on now, you are massively overthinking what is clearly a slice of classic Bethesda jank. Why is this bothering you so much and not the endless physics glitches, dialogue issues, and other charming bugs that characterise these games?
Death awaits you.
Well, hypothetical person, that's a very interesting question. You can totally see it as jank and nothing more, and if you can, then I'm glad. Jealous, even. But it just does not play that way to me. For other classic Skyrim bugs, it's very clear what they are. There's no part of me that wonders if that dragon should have just flown through that rock and vanished. It's clearly a bug, and bugs aren't necessarily okay, but it's clear what's expected from me as a player. I can either ignore them for the sake of getting the rest of the experience, or I can find them unacceptable, and I guess stop playing. But this is different.
No more. I yield.
It's not obviously broken, and can be plausibly explained within the fiction. And it's not disruptive to gameplay in a way that makes it obviously in need of addressing. It basically falls into the game mechanic equivalent of the uncanny valley for me. Plausible and well implemented enough that its profound strangeness is incredibly distracting. I have no idea what the behind the scenes reason is for this system being like this. My guess is that this is just an unfinished mechanic for some more fleshed out surrender system that they just left part of in the game. It's just too baffling to me what the intent is, either narratively or gameplay wise otherwise. However, they've not done anything about it despite the huge number of patches, expansions and new versions. For all I know, this is working exactly as the design's intended, a thought that honestly boggles my mind. But now we get to the twist, the thing that compelled me to make this video about a minor mechanic in an incredibly over-discussed 14-year-old game. Almost no one remotely cares. Before I started making this video, I checked around to see if anyone else had made a video or any other content about Skyrim's surrender system and found nothing. Just a couple of semi-related meme videos and not much else. Okay, I thought. Not necessarily that surprising. There's not many folks making videos or writing about specific game mechanics. And I really hope no one is currently typing out a comment pointing one out. So I watched some of the longer form content about Skyrim as a whole and came up completely short. Admittedly, I hardly watched everything. There's more videos about Skyrim on this platform than there are cute cat videos. But I watched a fair amount, and it didn't even get a mention. I'm not expecting a full section on it or anything, but Patrician TV can make a 20-hour-long video on the game, spending almost 2 hours on dissecting the magic system alone. But this bizarre and broken mechanic doesn't even get a single sentence? It's not like I found nothing. Otherwise, I'd have been worried that I had a bugged version of Skyrim or something. But there were references about. A bemused forum thread here, a mod focused on fleshing it out more there. But not much at all, and even on these forum threads, people seemed mildly amused mostly. At worst, folks seemed slightly disappointed that it wasn't more fleshed out. And I certainly couldn't find anyone as bothered as me. And I just cannot understand why. Why does almost no one mind? Why does no one care? If you were asking me to design a new Skyrim system to deliberately harm the experience of play, I'd really struggle to come up with something better than having enemies occasionally beg for their lives, but be unable as the player to react to it. And yet it's absolute cricket. And a reminder, this is not some niche Easter egg that you need to go out of your way to trigger. This happens all the flipping time. Every one of the tens of millions of Skyrim players has repeatedly had enemies beg for their lives and been forced to either summarily execute them or watch on awkwardly as they crawl around before resuming the fight. Sure, some folks are addressing it with mods. This mod to let you talk to and loot surrendering enemies has 27,000 downloads. Not bad, and at least it is tangible proof that I'm not the only one bothered by this. Though for comparison, the mod to add extra dialogue and romance options to Sirana, a companion NPC, is comfortably over 1 million downloads, so it hardly seems to be a top priority for the community. Aside from anything else, where are the jokes, the memes? I've been taking this all far too seriously, but this system seems pretty ripe for comedy for me. How did we get thousands of jokes out of...
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an arrow in the knee.
When all I can find on fake surrendering is this one video, the description of which ironically reads, "Anyone else disappointed the enemies never actually surrender in this game?" I hate to break it to you, Astronaut28, but barely anyone is. It might just be me and you. The only possible conclusion is that this simply does not bother most people, at least nowhere near as much as me. If you're someone who actually likes or gets something meaningful out of the surrender system, please leave a comment, because I'll be really interested to read your take on it. But for now, I just cannot conceive of what it could be, unless you want to roleplay and embrace being a villain, and even then it must take some of the pleasure out knowing that the enemies are ostensibly trying to trick you. But for the presumed majority of players who aren't intentionally playing a villainous murder hobo, why would they not care? To try and illuminate this, I watched a few folks' first playthroughs of Skyrim, and all it really did was hammer home how much of a me problem this is.
Let me help you. Dude, let me help you.
You think
Okay, okay.
Fall back!
Fall back, it's just you.
I think I shot my horse. Oh yeah, you got him good.
Nice.
Gods no! You win, I swear!
Okay. Thank you, Ghost.
Victory's yours, I submit!
Oh my god, he said victory is yours, I submit, and I killed him. Oh no. Fuss!
Not only do folks not care, they barely even notice. And it's vexing to admit, but are they wrong to? Watching these folks' first few hours in game, it really struck me how great Skyrim is at introducing itself. There is so little confusion to be found in these playthroughs, despite this being people's first time in game, either about how to play or what they should be doing to have fun. Skyrim is simply so great at making its core loops and gameplay concerns apparent, making it clear what you should, and importantly for us, should not be paying attention to. To put it bluntly, there is nothing in Skyrim's introduction or presentation that would lead you to expect much in the way of emotional complexity or challenge. So I think players just don't see it, even when something that challenges that expectation happens right in front of them. Because Skyrim has done such a good job of priming your expectations by the time it happens. Or maybe your horse just breaks the bandit's spine before you have a chance to register what is happening. Either way. So what do we take from this little journey we've been on? Am I wrong to be so bothered by this system? Is everyone else wrong to be blind to its obvious immersion-shattering strangeness? Well, at the risk of sounding like a wishy-washy centrist on the matter, I think it's obviously neither. We talked earlier about immersion like it was a one-way street, something done by a game to a player. The truth is, it's much more of a two-way process, requiring participation and complicity from the player to maintain the illusion. Even in the most immersive of games, it's trivially easy to act in a way that exposes the fakery of the situation. You do not need crazy speedrunning strategies to expose the limitations of digital worlds, though they can be incredibly fun. Just jump on a table and start kicking the cutlery around, or rub a loaf of bread on a shopkeeper while they look back at you impassively, and it becomes abundantly clear what this is. A game, with limitations like any other. The way I see it, games, especially open world games like Skyrim, are less like, say, theatrical experiences that you sit and passively receive, and are more like acting partners in an improvised scene, providing you with prompts for action and producing hopefully interesting responses to your own prompts. Which makes perfect sense because digital RPGs arose directly out of pen and paper RPGs, which have an intrinsically improvisational design, focused on creative co-storytelling between players and game masters. And just like any good improv partnership, gaming requires a willingness to work around limitations and mistakes on both sides. Good games are often stuffed with accommodations for player mistakes and failings as an improv partner. We have quest logs in case you forget what you're doing, quest markers in case you forget where you're going, and when all else fails, there's always the quick load button. And similarly, experienced players are typically good at predicting and working around game limitations, and meeting them halfway to hopefully have an enjoyable and immersive experience. Have you ever introduced a game to someone who has never played one before? One of the trickiest things for them is intuiting where the limitations of the simulation are. Why can't I ask that person which way to go? Why can't I climb that slope? Why can't I kill that irritating child? Some level of experience is always required to learn the limitations of games as improv partners. The point is, both players and games have to make an effort for an immersive experience to take place. And I think that's what's happening here. It's not that everyone else can't see what I see. They're just doing their part as good improv partners and not dwelling on the misstep. It's me who's letting the side down by finding this so hard to get past. Again though, immersion can be a fragile thing, and exactly what breaks it might be incredibly specific and personal to you. For example, there is a video that I love from YouTube channel Face Full of Eyes, which breaks down the history of handedness in games. It's a great video all around, but I found it especially interesting for providing a unique perspective on games that I was already familiar with. Resident Evil 5, a game I remember as being a pretty middling action game, is made great through their eyes by its thoughtful portrayal and mechanical implementation of one of the leads being left-handed. And conversely, games I love become exemplars of bad practice when it comes to implementing handedness. Given Face Full of Eyes' interest and expertise there are probably games that they would otherwise enjoy that they find less enjoyable and immersive because they implement handedness poorly. Is this a shame? Yes. Are they wrong to feel that way? Well, obviously not. Similarly, it's a shame that I find such a small part of Skyrim so immersion disrupting. It's evidently pretty specific to me, and who knows where it comes from. Maybe it's unfair and unflattering expectations I'm bringing from the previous games in the series. Maybe it's because it feels like a direct frustration of my usual instinct to try and play a good aligned character. Maybe it's simply that it feels like I'm getting a glimpse of a game that I'd unfortunately find more interesting than the Skyrim we actually have. All I can be sure of is that I wish I did not feel this way. It is only ever a bad thing when the immersion is broken and the magic of games is dispelled, especially if much of the rest of the experience is working for you. Today though, I don't want to end on a sad note. Trying to write this video made me appreciate how amazing a thing true immersion is, and how lucky I am to experience it so often despite all of the barriers that are always there. Sure, there are plenty of games which I could not get into for whatever reason, but there are hundreds more which, at least for a time, have transported me fully to other worlds, given me new perspectives and delivered some of the most impactful experiences of my life. Magic is real, and it can be found on a screen. So here's to games and the developers who make them. Here's to cooperation and compromise. Here's to Skyrim and the billions of hours of enjoyment it's given game players for the past decade and a half, including me. And here's to immersion that never ends, even if we know deep down that it must. And here's to you, dear viewer, for joining me once again. Thank you for letting me get this extremely specific rant off my chest. I hope you got something out of it. I can feel an old weight being lifted by putting my thoughts together and putting this out there. Let's see. Maybe that mechanic won't annoy and confuse me anymore, and I'll be able to enjoy Skyrim like never before.
No more! I yield! I yield!
Nope. I mean, why on earth does that happen? It's just so completely and utterly baffling. How could anyone not think this is daft? Todd? Todd! What on earth were you thinking? Why did you never fix or update this? Why am I the only one who cares? Am I crazy? Todd!